February 28. We leave Baltimore on the steamer Cambria, bound for Richmond. We are 1,100 prisoners in all. In the early morning of March 1, we have our first glimpse of our homeland. At either shore reigns the stillness of desolation, and soft murmuring waves sound sad to the ears which heard them in happier times. The landing places are destroyed, and charred ruins of happy homes meet the eye on every side. The habitations that remain show but little signs of life, but look mournfully down upon the devastated fields and desecrated graves. Alas, the envious invader has not spared Virginia's pride, and heavy has been the tread of war's iron heel, and the blight of the destroyer has withered the land. We are gliding towards the landing. Delightful thought! Our boat is now alongside of one of those only arrived a few hours ago, bearing sick and dead Confederates. Alas, poor fellows, what suffering! And many were not even allowed to catch sight of their own dear Dixie before death claimed them for his own. About 20 lie on the boat, faces covered, and their spirits fled. Many others will die before they reach Richmond, and others will have only the mournful satisfaction of dying in hospital in the capital of the Confederacy. Their sunken and glazed eyes attest this, and their strong hope that something may yet be done for them in Dixie is all that stops the clutch of death pressing upon their throats. Poor fellows, how anxious they are to reach once more Southern soil. See, the most emaciated among them spring forward with a light step, as if they could walk for miles in such a cause. But exhausted by their efforts, they fall prostrate and have to be conveyed in ambulances or whatever vehicles can be furnished. The roads are heavy for the recent rains, and unaccustomed to walking, we find it as much as we can to not break down. Crowds of recently freed Negroes stop their work in the fortifications off the roads and hasten with pick and shovel in hand to gaze upon their former masters. Poor fellows, a change of masters is not always the best. At last we reach our flag of truce boat, which we take possession of with deafening cheers. My brother James is among the first to hail me and bid me welcome, being one of the committee to look after the wounded. We are moving on towards Richmond town, where we arrive a little before dark. My brother and I proceed together to the house, where to a surety there is a great rejoicing over the long-lost prisoner. The returned prisoners are far more hopeful than the citizens and those who have remained at home watching the coming events with anxious scrutiny. I find nearly all my friends gloomy and despondent in regard to the future of the Confederacy. Several causes combine especially to cause this gloom, among which I may enumerate the contraction of the limits of the Confederacy, the late dispersion of earliest last remnants of a force in the valley, the difficulty to provide sufficient rations for the soldiers, the frequent desertions from our ranks, and another cause, slight but often weighing much upon the spirits, is the weather which has been raining and glooming for some time past. March 30th, 1865. Ben Haskins and I, having agreed upon a visit to Ben Brown at Amherst, and began our journey this morning. We go from Banville to Burkeville Junction, where we must stay overnight before catching the train for Lynchburg. While we are here, an alarm is raised that the Yankee cavalry are coming over the hills to attack the town. The enemy are even seen, by those most alarmed and pointed out, drawn up in line of battle upon an elevated ridge of hills a mile or two distant. Their movements, too, may be indistinctly observed by an onset with sabers drawn, might be momentarily expected. But an old resident of Burkeville was certain that he had seen them trees standing there ever since he could remember, so that our alarmist, after all, in getting up this panic, had only quixotic premises for their basis. The trees continue to move their arms and shake their leafy plumes, but as they do not charge us with sword or lance, our fears gradually subside. We reach Amherst and are welcomed by the Browns. While at dinner, the Browns, one of Browns' servants, just arrived from Lynchburg, reports the fall and capture of Richmond by the Yankees. Of course, that's all nonsense. Can't fool me like that. I've heard of Richmond being taken too often to believe any such rumor as that. But suppose there should be truth in the rumor. Just supposing now Richmond has been captured, What on the face of the earth am I to do? Cut off from home, no money, no clothes. The very thought is distracting. No, no, it cannot be so. We reached Lynchburg at 6 p.m. Richmond is beyond doubt the prize of the enemy. It is no longer in doubt. Why persons are here who beheld the exulting Yankee enter her burning streets? Great God, that it is too true. The intelligence is the most afflicting I've ever received. I feel bewildered, crushed by this sudden fearful fall. Never before have I felt so desolate, so prostrate, so hopeless. Farewell, poor, burning Richmond. Oh, that whole seas of blood and treasure poured out in your defense should be rendered of no avail by the disaster of a single day. No more to see my sisters and mother. And where shall I look for father and brother? Where is the old first, the bloody first, as General Kemper styled us upon the eve of the Battle of Fredericksburg? Pecos Division is said to be captured, nearly entire. Oh, most wretched of calamities, worse than the loss of our capital, that the noble and invincible army of Lee should be hewn and hacked to pieces by a vile host of Yankee hirelings. We determined to push on further south in the hope of joining the shattered Southern army and participating in some more fighting. Stragglers from Lee's armies are flowing by us in crowds. The army is completely disorganized, and every one foreign south is the sole idea. We borrow a mule from a Negro boy named Hiram. On this borrowed nag we move briskly and soon approach Pan Hill's Bridge through a portion of the state that has never felt the scorching breath of war or drunk the warm lifeblood of the South's bravest men. Here rise tall fences enclosing rich pastures, fields of waving wheat and sprouting corn, but the plenty scattered here appears in strange contrast with the desolation and exhaustion of the rest of the state. No Yankees are yet in sight, but our own cavalry are straggling across the bridge by scores. Also the infantry skulking from their regiments, invalids, trumpeters, etc. The country is full of deserters, and judging from its detached forces, the army under General Lee's immediate command must be reduced to a few thousand men. Arriving at Wrightsville, wet and weary, we fall in with a pressing gang who demand our fine and faithful mule for the service of the Confederate government. We are at first disposed to resent this highway assault, but the pressing officers are polite and impressive, showing us their papers and orders for doing this forcible deed. Upon examination, we find their papers correct and part with our valuable friend with much regret. In order not to incommode us too much, these agents of the government give us a small, lazy, and almost broken-down affair in the shape of a mule, and giving Hiram, the colored boy, donor of the mule, $10 extra, we prevail upon him to take us 5 miles further on our route. Poor Hiram. The large tears trickle down his cheeks at the thought of his lost mule. He beats the present mule unmercifully, however, partly I suppose because the beast is slow, partly to smother his indignation and his sorrowful remembrance of the other, which was so much superior to his present successor. We stop for the night at the house of a Mr. Jackson. While we are drying our clothes by a large log fire, his daughters prepared a meal for us which is to be considered dinner and supper together. The 3 daughters, one grown, another about 15, and the third about 11. While we are eating, these young damsels come in the dining room, gaze at us for a while, titter and then retire. This amusement they keep up until a late hour of the night, coming to the door and peeping through the cracks, giggling and running away. We proceed towards Danville, accompanied by Mr. Jackson's young son. By and by, young Jackson points out a house by the roadside where he thinks we can get some apple brandy. We enter, and a nice and gentle woman with a sad expression of countenance consents to sell us a pint, but is far more concerned for her absent husband, whom she fears has been killed in the recent battles. A little infant lies sweetly sleeping in its crib and smiling in its sleep, and an older child is making great sport with a cat upon the floor, both unconscious of their father's death and their mother's woe. We divide the brandy, but I think young Jackson gets the largest share, for very soon after we resume our journey, he shows unmistakable signs of elevation. Doffing his hat and twirling it high in the air, he puts his knack to redoubled speed and bids us follow him. As we approach Danville, the roads become thronged with stragglers of all descriptions. Wagon loads of people and their effects moving into Danville, and crowds moving from the town. No one appears to have any settled conviction of what they're going to do or what the government is going to do. All is confusion and panic. Jackson, in spite of his father's commands, urged on by curiosity, takes us all the way to Danville. Here, not finding any places open where we could treat him, we send him back, giving him $5 with which to treat himself. I doubt a little if he got back safe with horses and buggy, for such articles are in constant demand by many loose and roguish stragglers. Danville is in a perfect uproar. The President and his cabinet were here last night, and hearing officially of Lee's surrender, left these parts for Greensboro, North Carolina. It is even reported that he has been captured, for a strong body of the enemy are said to be between this place and Greensboro. There is now no doubt of Lee's general surrender, which is to be feared would be the closing act of our bloody tragedy. Poor Richmond, poor Lee, poor Army, poor Confederacy. The streets are choked with government wagons trying to force their way out of town. Soldiers and officers of every degree and description throng the town, mingled in one promiscuous mass, everyone asking and but few answering. Some hurry by to take this road, saying it is safer. Others seek an exit from the opposite side of the town. Here's an immense crowd at the depot, and they are carrying off everything transportable. Bales of cotton, wools, bundles of raw cotton, boxes of licorice, anything so as substantial and capable of being moved. No chance to leave the town by cars. The track has been torn up, and Mr. Davis and party only escape capture by 1 hour. What shall we do? Cut off and hemmed in the little town of Danville? The commissary of the town is most liberally dispensing his stores to all who will take them, and the quartermaster's stores are being equally distributed. Large crowds of savage and bloodthirsty-looking stragglers parade the streets and appear awaiting an opportunity to do some ugly deed. Is not the Confederacy fleeing too fast for one foot to keep up with? Most assuredly it is at present, and I fear it cannot recover from this blow. Still, as long as I am an officer in the Confederate States Army, I feel in honor bound to follow the fortunes of the Confederacy until its cause is hopeless or its hopes of success revive. We continue to converse at the gateway courteously, modestly, and becomingly, for they all seem to be very ladylike, nor would they, I am sure, have remained at the gateway speaking with strangers, but for their perturbed state of their public and their laudable but excessive anxiety to hear the latest and render all the service their feeble voices were capable to the gallant heroes of the Confederacy, who are in such numbers fleeing from the state in order to choose another and better position for the exhibition of their valor and the intimidation of their foes. Mutual encouragement. At our topic of conversation, naturally enough, being the late reverses of our noble state, captain and army, we agreed with these young damsels that it was downright a shame for people, as many as were doing, to talk of giving up our glorious struggle and submitting to the bonds of Yankee slavery. What though Lee had been defeated? Still every Southern heart must be unsubdued and animated should each strong arm be to battle to the bitter end, and even if the war-scarred veterans should fail in their noble efforts, the very women of the South should rise up to expel the hated invaders from the soil, with many assurances that such feelings would ever animate our hearts, and that we should never despair the Republic as long as a single straw floated upon the scarlet billows of the sea of carnage. We bade adieu to our charming young acquaintances and hasten on our route. We walk for a mile or so and are again forced to stay our eager footsteps by the appearance of another cluster of fair maidens, who were just as solicitous concerning the welfare of the Confederacy as were those with whom we had just parted. With these we exchanged many kind words and many assurances of future success, of the great exploits they might one day learn had been performed to immortalize, our individual names forever encircled in the blaze of our country's glory. Then, our mule and buggy disappearing in the distance, we bid a reluctant farewell and stride away after our mule. When leaving them, Miss Tulton, one of the fair damsels, presented me with a purple flower, which I instantly transferred to my buttonhole, and it emits a pleasing fragrance all day. Resuming our journey, we approach after some hours a nice-looking house where we ask permission to stop and boil our coffee. A youth of about 17 years of age comes to the door and invites us in. He says we shall have all the hospitality he can afford, and at the same time informs us that he is in a wretched state of mind, for his tutor is absent from home and has left him in sole charge of the house, that he has some 17 young ladies on his hands, most of them strangers to him, and how is he going to provide places for them to sleep in that house he doesn't know. Poor youth! How do I pity that youth, 17 young ladies? Poor fellow! How they happened to fall to his lot he didn't tell, but assured me that he felt the full weight of responsibility, and I believed him. Our object now is to move south as quickly as possible, keeping ahead of the Confederacy, which is established for the present in this little Union hole of Greensboro. Here are Mr. Davis and his cabinet. General Beauregard and Johnson's army are a short distance from the town. In the hospital at High Point, we meet a Confederate soldier in his arm, with his arm amputated. The poor fellow is very cheerful, laughing and talking. It says he feels the loss of his arm only when he thinks of his wife and child, dependent on their Yankee despoilers for their daily rations. Continuing towards Salisbury, our journey is perilous because the country through which we are to pass is said to be infected with swarms of bushwhackers who are sworn enemies to the Confederacy, being nearly all deserters from the army and living on plunder. We put up for the night in the very strange home of Mrs. Cockles and her daughters. It is a very poor-looking house, and the old widow woman was very much put out, as there were bigger houses in the area that we could have stayed in, but someone had sent us to her. It now being dark, and the rain beginning to fall again, we beg her to give us any accommodations she can, and we will be satisfied. So she said she would do what she could, and introduced us into a large room serving the purpose of kitchen, dining room, bedchamber, and parlor. Here before a large fire we dry our clothes, and afterwards are entertained by Mrs. Couples' 3 daughters, sharp and stout country lasses, who dip snuff quite freely and openly. As I'd never seen anyone dip, I'm not only amused but disgusted. The old woman we do not see take of any of this enjoyment. Probably she has broken herself of the disgusting practice. The girls are nearly grown, good-looking but very coarse in words and manners. They are sitting on the bed and appear by every look and gesture to hurl defiance at our party, and they keep close together as though united to repel any attack coming from our quarter. I am sure, however, that there is not a single one of us who is bold enough to attack these fiery and able-bodied Amazons. We adopt the conciliatory style, and after 1 or 2 ill-timed assaults had been repulsed with loss, for they had sharp and witty tones, these girls, and by a mutual and implicit truce being agreed upon, they cease all hostile demonstrations and enter into amicable conversation, so that after a substantial but coarse supper, they propose to dance a Scotch-a-round. But our education being neglected in respect to this never-to-be-forgotten and graceful accomplishment, they good-naturedly undertake in a few words to initiate us into the mysteries of this wonderful dance, and we are soon in all its circumvolutions and hop around in the most approved Highland mode. After dancing till we thoroughly tired, the old widow invites us to retire. When closing our eyes for repose, the 3 sisters, our dried companions of the evening, joy in chorus from the adjoining room, making night hideous. It would be vain to attempt to do justice to the voices of these wood-nymphs. Their strains are incomparable, and we sink into the arms of gentle slumber convinced that such melody we never heard before. We are on the road again. The next stop is at the house of Mrs. Daniels. Mrs. D. gives us a most abundant supper, and I've noticed that in all the houses in North Carolina where we have taken our meals, even the poorest families have an abundance of eatables. They may be coarse articles, but there is no lack of food, whereas in Virginia, even in the wealthiest households, many of the luxuries and abundance are missed from the table. Another thing we notice, that at breakfast and supper as well as at dinner, we nearly always find pastry pies upon the table. We passed a party of bushwhackers, all armed with rifles and stationed at the fork of several roads. 6 or 7 in all, they were quite a formidable body, and I'm sure they were all deserters from our army. As they looked severely and suspiciously at our little party, we thought we had best go over and speak to them. They were desperate-looking fellows, all of them, and answered our questions a little doggedly. They were waiting there, they said, for horse thieves, who had been stealing mules and horses from the neighborhood, and woe, said they, to any fellow they catch. Among them is the most deformed man I ever saw. He has small portions of hands and arms of unequal length and size, the longer of which is about 1.5 feet. His legs are mere stumps, deformed in the most hideous manner, upon which he can in no wise stand. He says he can ride pretty well, and there's a horse present for his special convenience. Why he is with this band of desperadoes, I can't say, unless it is to identify stolen horses. Feeling very much relieved that we have no horses with us whereby we may attract suspicion, we move on our road rejoicing. We finally secure passage on a train bound for Charlotte. The railroad is thronged with straggling soldiers, all dejected, all conquered, all going south, all anxious to get a place upon any passing train. It is past midday when we succeed in getting a foothold upon a densely packed train. After proceeding a few miles, the train runs off the track, and we are obliged to get off the run for another several yards ahead. We succeed in scrambling to a place upon the tender, sitting upon the wood to be consumed. Every portion of this train is crowded to excess. Inside, the travelers are packed both sitting and standing, and the platforms, roofs, and even the engine room are filled. So great is the throng that the engineer is unable to work the engine, and we are delayed until nearly dark before getting under way, and what a way we have. President Davis and his retinue are just past us on horseback. As he passes, a hearty cheer bursts from the mass of human beings thronging our train, and the President of his fallen country lifts his hat in polite acknowledgment of our respect and sympathy. Oh, but this is a sad sight. We proceed slowly towards Charlotte, and every time that wood is needed, we have to get off the tender and jump on again as soon as they have wooded up. Such a journey I've never made, and we are frightened nearly beyond measure lest the whole crowd be precipitated down some cliff or thrown off some bridge. As we near our journey's end, we are stopped, and upon inquiring the cause, discover that we have made a narrow escape. The train a few hours ahead of us had been thrown from the track by the removal of the rail, and 3 men were killed and 7 injured. Some think the rail was removed by Union enemies who expected Mr. Davis and his cabinet would be on this train. Others say that stragglers who had been refused a place on the cars had taken this diabolical means of revenge. We make the best of our way into the town of Charlotte, arriving here between 1 and 2 in the morning. We finally secure some hospitality from Mr. Kerr. We debate with ourselves next morning what to do next. The government is completely disorganized and can support neither its soldiers nor paroled officers. The only organized body of troops that have made their way from Virginia are Duke's and Don's brigades of cavalry. Their officers are, many of them, jingling their spurs around the hotel, and with abundance of silver in their pockets, living high. How they have obtained this specie, I don't know. I am perfectly wretched here in Charlotte, having no one and having no claim on anyone for bed or board. I think the best thing for me to do is to go back to Richmond, but suppose I can do that, what then? Will not they all be beggars like myself? Oh, what a wretched condition of affairs we are all plunged in by this unfortunate war. I met a young fellow from Charleston. He says he's going back to Richmond and insists that I go back with him. I think I'll do it. It is madness to go farther south, and going back does not present a very encouraging prospect. Imprisonment, starvation, all kinds of dangers, sufferings, and death in many forms stare me in the face. President Davis arrives this afternoon and makes an address to a large number of people and soldiers. He has just received a telegram from General Joseph Johnston to the effect that Abraham Lincoln, the President of the Northern States, was assassinated upon the 14th at a theater in Washington City, and that Secretary Seward was stabbed in his own house the same night and is not expected to live. The most intense excitement prevails throughout the town upon the receipt of this intelligence, and people don't know whether to rejoice or to be sad. And the reason appears to be that they are not sure whether it is better for the South that Abraham should be king or some successor. But whether they feel glad or otherwise, there seems to pervade the minds of nearly all a horror for the crime by which the monster was got rid of. People may be glad that a tyrant, a puppet if you please, the tool of a party whose lifelong aspirations and untiring efforts were directed with fiendish malice to the destruction and annihilation of millions of their fellow citizens, and whose designs have been carried out with a venom and a malignity which neither their originator and instigator, the arch-fiend alone, could prompt, the people may be glad that this tyrant has fallen. But that he died in his sins and by the assassin's weapon, leaving the taint of suspicion upon Southern men or upon this government, may be sources of regret and even of horror. All I desire is to get home, and I'm so worried all day about the means. Never before have I felt so much distress of mind, and never have I felt so utterly abandoned. Many silly rumors are going the rounds today and posted upon the bulletin board in the middle of the town. Seward, it is said, cannot possibly survive and is at the point of death, if not already dead. Andrew Johnson, in terror of the consequences and the vengeance of the infuriated North, has fled the country. The whole North is in confusion, anarchy. The Peace Party are fighting the Republicans. Grant's army is disbanded. General Eccles, in command here, orders all paroled prisoners to leave this town for Augusta, Georgia. What am I to do now? Never ago, I am not going to Augusta, General Eccles, and don't think you have any right to say so. And it is extremely hazardous to go towards Richmond, for the disbanded army are running wild all over the country, stealing, plundering, murdering, and seizing trains of cars wherever they can find them. There's no order, no organization anywhere, and the government does not pretend to control the actions of any individual or collection of individuals. All is chaos and confusion. It is very evident that the smash-up is irretrievable. Upon returning to the hotel, we observe a crowd gathering before the president's door, who, by the way, has quarters in the very shabby-looking house, who, it is said, is in close consultation with General Breckinridge, who just arrived. The crowd calls lustily for General B., who comes to the door, and with grace and dignity excuses himself from addressing them and retires. There appears to be no doubt of the existence of an armistice between Johnston and Sherman and the death of Abraham I. He ruled a saucy nation for 4 years, but assassination finally ruled him. The state of the country is frightful at present. Murder and foul crimes are rife in the land. Mr. Davis says nothing to us, nor appears abroad. He is opposed to peace measures, especially such as we will obtain from the North. His cabinet are all against him, seeing the futility of trying to resist when throughout the South scarce a respectable bodyguard of organized troops can be found to protect his own person. Mr. Davis believes that farther south the people will rise again and flop by thousands to his standard. Poor President, he is unwilling to see what all around him see. He cannot bring himself to believe that after 4 years of glorious struggle, we are to be crushed into the dust of submission. Oh, it is a bitter, bitter draught, and will torture our proud natures with the most excruciating agony if it spares vitality itself. And if the people blame Mr. Davis for their woes and humiliations, let them remember that his measures were taken for the best. He did all he could, and if he failed, it was not only owing to his own errors and those in his cabinet. The chief cause of the failures rests with the people, yes, with the people, for the Southern people have been false to their country. Had Mr. Davis received the support of the Southern people as Mr. Lincoln did that of the North, our armies would still hold a proud and defiant attitude in the field, and our government stand upon a firm footing. April 24th, when the whole country seems to be steeped in fatal lethargy, unwilling or unable to resist or forward anything. Everyone is content to permit approaching events to take an unimpeded course, no matter what results may follow. Groups stand around the street corners listening to the news and rumors, but no one asks what's to be done. All ask what has been done or what they may expect next. No head, no body. The Confederacy is dissolved. Oh, this is a cruel, cutting stroke into the very heart of Southern pride. Bow down, now, crushed Southern hearts, bow down the head to receive the servile yoke, which the money-making Puritans have so long yearned to place upon thy neck. They have the power now. How long they shall be permitted to use it, God only knows. I secure a place on the train for Greensboro. Reach Greensboro 4 p.m., everything in confusion. An attack has just been made upon the quartermaster's stores by stragglers, which was repulsed by a guard of Johnston's army. Great excitement prevails, and the quartermaster is giving out shoes to those who ask for them. Stop over at Greensboro tonight. April 27th. I walked around the town this morning, and the relics of a departed Confederacy remind me of the abandoned remains of some large circus which sometimes, as a child, I used to move among when the tents have been struck, the horses gone, their doughty trappings no longer visible, and feelings akin to sadness would creep into my young heart as I looked upon the remnants of what had been its glories, now all departed. But now with the bitterness of an older and more disappointed heart, I gazed on the ruins of a fallen republic. Countless fragments of government papers, receipts, transportation papers, etc., strewn in the ground in front, in hopeless confusion. We put up at the home of my old friend George Bethel. I go down to his fields with George to watch the Negro hands at work. There are a number of them plowing, planting, and covering up corn in the same field. They are working with a will today, women and men together, for if they finish this patch of ground before 12 o'clock, they are entitled to rest for the remaining portion of the day. I asked George what they do the rest of the day, and he showed me upon a portion of the farm their own little patches, which the Negroes take a pride in cultivating, and have a right to all produce by their own ground. Every Saturday afternoon, as today, each one devotes some hours to the care of his own garden. Happy creatures, whose bliss is greatly owing to their ignorance, but the restless spirit of New England has spread its wings on the blast, and its envenomed breath has gone forth to poison the happiness of black and white. Finally, we start towards Danville. Along the road, we pass many Negroes deserting their masters and going to Danville to search for those blessings so liberally promised them by Uncle Abraham and the whining hypocrites of New England. May 4th, I finally get a place on a train to Richmond. May 4th, 8:30 a.m., I finally get home. I shall not attempt to describe my feelings. The city in ruins, and the hated and triumphant army of our malignant foes marching through the ruined city. With a raging headache and a swelling heart, I reach my home, and here the curtain falls.